Morning, good afternoon, good evening. If I had the opportunity to send a message to Mnangagwa, it will be simply this: end gerrymandering now. According to the English dictionary, gerrymandering is when you play around with the boundaries in an election for the purposes of giving yourself or your party an advantage. And the best definition I've managed to get is the following: to an untrained eye, the proposed boundaries look like the etchings of a map maker on heavy pharmaceuticals. In reality, it's a masterpiece of diabolical gerrymandering. In other words, you turn and twist to try to give yourself advantage. I think Carl is correct here. The kind of gerrymandering that we have seen in Zimbabwe really can only be rationally explained as here is somebody who must be heavy on some drug. And of course, there is no addictive drug as powerful as absolute power. Mnangagwa has enjoyed absolute power for over 44 years. And he is addicted, absolutely hooked. Here is a man who has rigged the elections countless of times to stay in power. We have even committed mass murders to establish and return his de facto one-party state, Zanu-PF one-party state. He has played around with boundary borders during elections, intimidation, you name it, he's done it. He has even committed what one can only call an electoral coup in 2008. And in 2017, a military coup. And last year, he blatantly rigged the elections. That even the regional body, SADC, the continental body, the AU, election observers condemned the process as flawed. But he had to do it to stay in power. And you think he will be content with that? No. Rumor has it that he has just done a politburo shuffle for the purposes of trying to extend his stay in power beyond 2028 when the next elections are due. There is a story behind this recent move. Zimbabwe's constitution at independence did not have an executive president. That constitution was changed because Mugabe wanted to be executive president. And so the constitution was changed. And because he wanted to stay in power a bit longer than his MPs, the constitution was changed in such a way that parliamentary elections will be every 5 years. Presidential elections will be every 6 years. And so the 1996 elections were presidential. He did very well. And he stayed in power. He won that year something like 90% of the vote. The next election for him was the 2002. He noticed something then, because he then only won by 58%, 56.2%. And he noticed that for the presidential elections, his Zanu-PF MPs left him to fight it alone. And he nearly lost. And so he had to do something about it. The next parliamentary election was 2005. He didn't participate in those ones because after the 2002 presidential, his next one was 2008. He didn't have to worry about it. But he was still worried about 2008 because 2002 had been a warning shot that his MPs will let him fight it alone. And so as the country got nearer to 2008, he resorted to trying to change the constitution. He got the same people that Mnangagwa is now trying to get, Patrick Chinamasa, to change the constitution so that the presidential election, instead of being held in 2008, will be postponed to be held in 2010. So he wanted to save 2 more years without being elected. The constitution clearly said the presidential term is 6 years. So here you are. He wants to change the constitution to make it 8 years, just to benefit himself. If that's not hilarious, I don't know what is. Maybe is those who are assigned, it was Patrick Chinamasa and Mnangagwa, were assigned to change the constitution. They realized that it could not be done. So in the end, his solution was, okay, we'll have harmonized elections that will force his MPs to participate in the 2008 elections. And his argument is, we want harmonized elections. We don't want presidential separated from parliamentary ones. And so the constitution was changed so that although the parliamentary elections were not due until 2010, this time they were 2 years earlier. So they had to be held in 2008. And ever since, we've had harmonized elections. The presidential and the parliamentary and the local elections have been held all in 1 year. But now Mnangagwa has got a problem. The new constitution says the president can only stay in power for a maximum of 2 terms. And these 2 terms will be due by the time of the 2028 elections. So he's now trying to figure out how he can stay in power. And rumor has it that he's trying now to change the constitution yet again. This time, he wants to decouple. Instead of having harmonized elections, he wants to have separate elections. And this is where it gets even more interesting. The present constitution says the presidential term and the parliamentary term is the same, 5 years. He wants the constitution to be changed so that it says the parliamentary term is 5 years, so that come 2028, the parliamentary elections will be held. But the presidential ones will be delayed by another 2 years to 2030. The previous constitution that Mugabe changed to bring in these harmonized elections gave the presidential term 6. Now he wants to increase it to 8. Unbelievable. If that is not gerrymandering at its worst, it's unbelievable. This man is so obsessed about staying in power. He is trying every dirty trick in the book. I think gerrymandering with borders and the constitution and the voters' war and rigging election, it's bad enough. But when you start tampering with the constitution, and this time going back and forth purely for the purpose of suiting one individual, it's pathetic. This is pathetic. We had harmonized elections. We didn't even have a president then. We had the prime minister. Then they changed the constitution so that we have the president, an executive president, and he serves 6 years. That's when his term of office comes to an end. And at the end of the 6 years, there's going to be presidential elections. When Mugabe realized that his MPs were not helping him win the elections, he changed that. Initially, he wanted to take advantage of the fact that his election was going to be 2 years earlier than the parliamentary one. So he wanted to extend his own term by 2 years. When he couldn't do that, he didn't hesitate cutting the terms of the MPs from 5 years to 3 years. And they had to go to fresh elections. And now Mnangagwa is so desperate to hang on to power, he wants the parliamentary elections to go ahead in 2028 when their fixed term of 5 years comes to an end. Change the constitution so that his presidential term is extended by another 2 years. Where the 2 years come from, I don't know. So now we are going to have a presidential candidate with a term of 7 years. I think this is ridiculous. This is pathetic. No nation should allow somebody to be so obsessed about power, about staying in power, that they start rewriting the constitution back and forth just for the purposes of gratifying their insatiable greed for power, absolute power, wealth, and influence. This is ridiculous. I think the people of Zimbabwe must stand up and say, no, this is enough is enough. There's a good reason, of course, why Mnangagwa is so keen to hang on to power. This man has got a lot to account for. And he knows that if he was to lose power, his position will be very precarious, to say the least. He has been involved in rigged elections in Zimbabwe for the last 44 years. He was involved in the Kukuraundi massacre in 1983 to 1987. He was involved in the electoral coup of 2008, which he himself boasted about. How he stopped SEC announcing the results, and then was to take another 5-6 weeks to count 5 million votes and announce them in bits and pieces, forcing the runoff, in which there was wanton violence. Over 500 people were killed. And in all the 44 years, he has been at the heart of some of the worst corruption the world has ever seen. And he has used some of the looted wealth to bankroll his vote rigging machinery. The level of bribery that took place last year is just unbelievable. It wasn't just bribing 1 or 2 judges here and there. All the judges, for instance, were paid $400,000 US, just weeks before the nomination day for the election was to start. All senior officials involved with the election process were all paid bribes, from the directors of the CIO, senior police officers, church leaders, local traditional leaders, and so forth and so on. If somebody was to properly audit that, it would not be surprising at all if it was to be found that Mnangagwa squandered $5 billion US in elections last year. This is a country where even some of the big hospitals, like the referral hospitals, Parenyatwa, Pillow Hospital, are so poorly funded to the point where it's normal to hear that they don't even have a basic drug like painkiller. If a big hospital like that doesn't have does not have painkillers. One can imagine what the district hospitals, the state they are in. Zimbabwe is a failed state because for the last 44 years, the country has failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. That is at the heart of Zimbabwe's problem. And here is a man who is trying to extend those 44 years even more. If he was to carry out his intentions of tampering with the constitution to suit himself, he could be president still to 2030. And the kind of changes that he would have made will only make the country even less governable. But he doesn't care about that, of course. He just wants to stay in power. I think this is becoming intolerable. This is absolutely unacceptable. The number one task the people of Zimbabwe are facing today is making sure that 2023 elections, 2028, elections are free, fair, and credible, and not a repeat of 2023. And what we are seeing here, what Mnangagwa is doing now, is a clear sign that he has no intention of holding free, fair, and credible elections. He is even trying to tamper with the constitution just to give himself the opportunity to stay in power. This is totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. Zimbabwe has got to get out of this economic and political hellhole that Zanu-PF has landed us into. And here is the man who is holding us to ransom. We cannot move because of him. I think this is totally unacceptable. Mnangagwa is illegitimate. He rigged 2023 elections. He should not even be in office. And now he wants to stay on until 2030. No. That is totally unacceptable. Whatever he is trying to do, it must be stopped. And no stone should be left unturned to stop him. 44 years of tyrannical, corrupt rule by Zanu-PF has been more than enough for any nation. We have to stop this. This is just madness. This man is drunk on absolute power. And he can't think straight. This has got to stop. Thank you very much for listening and have a good day.